Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Bacasa. On today's show, we have Dalton Romanowski. Dalton is out of the Bend, Oregon area and has been a guide for several years now. He's been a guide at the Confluence Fly Shop and still is, but you are also a guide at World Cast Anglers out of Driggs, Idaho. So you've probably fished the Teton and the Henry's Fork and all those great rivers in and around there, including the Snake, world famous waters, in fact. But right now, you've really spent the last few years working on your game up in Bend, Oregon, in the Central Oregon river systems, which includes things like the Crooked River, the Deschutes, the Metolius, etc. But something that's not very well known within the area is the availability of Stillwater. So on today's show, we're going to talk a little bit about the rivers, but we're also going to focus on the availability of Stillwater in the region. And then at the end of the show, we're going to jump into, Dalton, your tip on how to identify structure in Stillwater and a specific nymph rig that you like and has been very successful for you. So I'm excited about this show. Dalton, it's great to have you on. How's life been up in Bend these days?
Oh man, life's been great. Just getting ready for the season to start, starting seeing some bugs coming out. Weather's getting warmer. Snow water equivalent is looking great for our lakes. So yeah, we're all getting really stoked around here.
Yeah. So when you moved to Bend, did you anticipate all the Stillwater that is available to you, or was that something that you knew about when you were heading out there?
That was really foreign to me. The idea of fishing lakes, I mean, you have the idea of like, fishing for bass and walleye in the Midwest. Like lake fishing for trout was just something that I really knew little about. So as soon as I moved here, I spent a lot of time on lakes. I think month of September when I first moved here, I spent every single day on East Lake out here. Just was not working and fished every single day and was really figuring out how to fish big Stillwater with not really knowing what to look for, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, it could be a daunting task at the start. We're going to talk about that later. When you started working on that, were you primarily bank fishing, or were you out in a pontoon, or how were you going about it to learn the water?
Yeah, so I started fishing from the bank because fishing Stillwater from banks can be really effective depending on where you're fishing. So I started out fishing from the banks, then I borrowed a buddy's pontoon boat and was just kind of kicking around, trying to find trout here and there, and then graduated to dropping my drift boat in, rowing around, and now when I get the chance, I'll throw a motor on and putts around, and yeah, I know what to look for now, which is nice. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
yeah. You educated yourself. Let's take a pause from the Stillwater. I know we're going to get into some real heavy detail on that in a bit here. I want
Mm-hmm.
to talk a little bit about some of the local rivers, because that's what the area is primarily known for. Can
Mm-hmm.
you talk a handful of the more popular rivers, but also some of the other destinations that people may not know about that are great fisheries?
Yeah, so everyone knows the Deschutes, right? Everyone knows the lower Deschutes. The thing about the Deschutes, though, it is a huge river. So when you hear people talk about the Deschutes River, 9 times out of 10, they're probably talking about that lower section that flows from Pelton Dam to the Columbia River. And that's, of course, where we have our native red sides, our red band trout. But also we have the middle and
Mm-hmm.
the upper Deschutes. And those two areas are very unknown as of this point. Of course, locals know all about it, but when traveling to Bend, those are definitely two pieces of water that get fairly untouched during the season because everyone's trying to drive up north and go down to the lower. And the fishing is just as good, if not better, in the upper and middle Deschutes. And there's more variety of species as well, which is really nice about the middle.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what about the little Deschutes? Is that an area that people fish pretty regularly as well?
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that. The little Deschutes, I haven't heard someone talk about that in a very long time. Middle Deschutes is good fishing. It is excellent dry fly fishing for brown trout. It's very still. It's very small, but that is also one of those very unknown pieces of water out here. We in Central Oregon we have a lot of these little pockets that um, not a lot of people know about, and that hold excellent fish and excellent dry fly opportunities, which is a big reason why people want to come out here. We have great dry fly fishing. We also have the
Yeah,
Crooked River out here that I spend a lot of time on, guide on. It's getting better every single
and that
year.
runs that. Yeah, and the Crooked River that runs through Smith Rock, right? If I recall,
Yeah, so it runs through
the park.
Smith Rock. It starts at Prineville Reservoir. It's a tailwater. Runs through Prineville all the way into Lake Billy Chinook, and it does go through Smith Rock as well. But yeah,
Yeah, I,
there's native red bands in there as well. And for a while, the Crooked kind of got a bad rep in the '90s, in the '80s and '90s. Everyone knew the Crooked around here. It was a blue ribbon fishery. Competitions were held on it. It was a very popular place, and the fish, it has native fish. There's beautiful fish in there, and because of low water years, a lot of fish died, and it has taken a
mm,
while to bounce back. And I think now it's finally starting to bounce back. We're seeing really healthy fish come out of there. So,
mm, mm. Yeah, years ago I had gone up to Smiths for climbing, right?
mm-hmm.
And I always thought, oh man, this is a beautiful place in the park, etc. So amazing, etc. And now I look at it as, oh, I'd love to go back up there and go fish in the park and be
Totally,
amongst the towers and spires and whatnot. All pretty
exactly,
rad.
yeah,
Seems like a rad zone.
totally.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You guys have quite a bit of variety, and I mean, a lot of those rivers. It's funny that you say, yeah, they're kind of unknown. But I mean, you pull up a Google map, and it's like they're relatively prominent on Google Maps. So
Oh yeah, of
to
course.
find out that they're unknown is a true attestament to the quality of water at the Deschutes and the
Mm-hmm.
Metolius, because it just draws everybody away.
It does. Yeah,
What
exactly.
about the Metolius? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, with the Metolius, man, there's so many things unique about it. Most of it is fly fishing only, so that's pretty special. And it is one of two rivers where you can legally target bull trout in the state. So you have the Chutes, and then you have the Imnaha, which is up near the Grand Ronde, so in northeastern Oregon. But yeah, it's gin clear. It's spring fed river. Extremely cold year round. I do not recommend wet wading it even in the heat of the summer. But huge bull trout in there, red band trout, whitefish, the occasional brown. It is a very healthy fishery. So, mm-hmm,
Yeah, the water is that, like, I don't even know how to describe it, that blue, almost glacial like
mm-hmm,
water. It's just beautiful.
right.
One of the things that I found about the Metolius was that it's got a lot of swirling currents.
mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, lots of really big eddies, like you said, swirling currents. There's not a lot of great places to wade on it, so it can be pretty treacherous. I've fallen in many times when I was first learning how to fish the Metolius. So you definitely have to be careful there, and it rips too. Not only is it cold, but you step in the wrong spot and you're 40 yards downriver in a matter of seconds. So yeah, you
Yeah.
definitely have to be careful out there. One thing that I really like about the Metolius is the culture there is really that of a steelhead river, in my opinion. A lot of people swing out there, swinging spay rods, and yeah, not a lot of people are fishing big streamers or nymphing. It's for the most part, it's a pretty purest river when it comes to, spay fishing and fishing dry flies as well. So I think that's pretty unique.
Yeah. My experience there too was that if you weren't familiar with that style, people were really open to helping you and, kind of the open book of like, hey, try this, oh, you want to be over in this direction. You want to make sure your fly's down here or wherever. It's
Right.
really quite comforting to see that from a lot of people.
Totally. And I mean, you've heard of the Metolius. Everyone's heard of the Metolius. It gets a lot of pressure. And I think because it is such a challenging fishery, like I think that's why people want to help people out. Fish are rarely caught on the Metolius. There are, I want to say there's something like 400 fish per river mile out there. So, I mean, that's pretty much nothing. There's not a lot of fish in there. So we want to help people out. We want people to experience what the Metolius has to offer. And, of course, that's educating people on how to properly handle a threatened species such as the bull trout. But yeah, I'm totally fine giving people tips and tricks for fishing the Met, because I remember when I first moved here, there were some people that wouldn't tell me anything, and then there's guys that would. And it's, for the most part, it's a really positive culture here. You don't get that territorial culture like you do in a lot of other Western rivers. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's nothing like looking down into that water and seeing 3 or 4 bulls stacked up in a little pocket, and
Mm-hmm.
Going after them, man, and watching them eat. Can be pretty amazing.
Totally.
Let's jump back to that Stillwater scenario.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about one of the particular lakes, East Lake, but
Mm-hmm.
there's quite a few other opportunities in and around the area. Tell us a little bit about how that structure is, and location to Bend, etc.
Yeah. So in Bend, we are pretty much smack dab in the middle of the state of Oregon, and man, within 30 minutes to an hour drive from town, there are dozens of lakes that have quality trout in them, and a huge variety of species as well. Yeah, I mentioned East Lake. East Lake is known for big browns, big rainbows. There's an occasional brook trout in there too. I didn't even know that, and I caught a brook trout there a couple years ago, and it's not even, brook trout aren't even listed on the ODFW on the ODFW's website for what's in East Lake. So I thought that was kind of cool. There's kokanee as well in East Lake, but yeah, we have lakes that hold huge brook trout, such as Lake Hosmer, and there's actually landlocked Atlantic salmon in Hosmer a while back. I don't think they're in there anymore, but we have lakes that have huge lake trout as well. Crane Prairie, they're known for their rainbow trout fishing. Wiki Up, big brown trout. So we have all these lakes in our area, and you go to these lakes to target a specific species. And I think that's kind of cool. So it's like one day, hey, I want to go catch a big brown. I'll go to East. I'll go to Paulina. I want to catch a lake trout. I'll go to Coltis. Like there's so much here. And yeah, I think that's pretty special, because I've heard of people traveling. The only time I've heard of people traveling somewhere to go fish Stillwater for trout would be up in Canada, and Canada is also known for their Stillwater fishing as well. But down here in the States, that's kind of unheard of. So I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, there aren't too many. Hegbin up in Montana is a bit of a destination at times
Yeah.
because other trico hatch and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
you're right. In the States, it's pretty uncommon to chase. And then it's also, I think, excuse me, what you highlighted that was very unique is you could go to one destination, being Bend, and you could target several different bodies of water for different species.
Right.
That's pretty rare for the States. Yeah.
Yeah, I would
So,
say so.
what's your favorite target out of hand?
Um, uh, East Lake. Like there's a reason why I spend so much time there. It's very small. It is surrounded by volcanic rock. You can fish it from the bank. It is a very wade friendly lake, which is cool. So you don't need a boat
Mm,
at all to do well. I actually prefer to fish it from the bank. Um, I've caught fish over 2 feet consistently, just fishing right from the shore, seeing fish cruising in shallow water. Um, I love Crane Prairie. Lots of really cool structure in Crane Prairie, and rainbows are huge in Crane, and that's a lot of fun to fish for them. Um, but yeah, and what's nice as well about the lakes is you can hit multiple lakes in a day. On Cascade Lakes Highway, that goes out of Bend towards Mount Bachelor. Um, that's our big ski mountain. On that
yep.
highway, there's I'm gonna leave some out, but there's Devil's Lake, there's Sparks Lake that actually, for how shallow it is, there are fish in there. You can get to Crane and Wickiup from there. Um, yeah, there are so many lakes on that one highway, and you can just
Hmm.
leapfrog and hit most of them in one day, which is
Yeah.
pretty cool. Mm-hmm.
In the style that you're fishing, are you sight fishing or blind casting more often? And are
Yeah,
you streamer or dry? Let's walk through that a little bit.
yeah. So I'm I mostly like to sight fish when I'm fishing lakes, and you can't do that in every lake. East Lake, Paulina Lake are two lakes that are great for sight casting. I primarily fish small leeches. That's kind of like a year round. I'll take a big chunk of leader. I like to fish 12-foot leaders out there, floating line, and a small leech, and let it sink for a little bit. Tiny ticks, tiny strips, and that thing will get eaten. So I love slow strip and leeches. The dry fly fishing is excellent. The Calabatus hatch on East Lake is amazing. They they'll eat terrestrials, beetles, ants do really well at pretty much every lake in the area. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
Streamers, you can do it all. But my two favorite ways to fish lakes around here are fishing tiny leeches and my Stillwater indicator rig. So yeah.
The tiny leech scenario
Mm-hmm.
is super fun, especially
Totally.
nowadays where you have the dubbings that can be dark but have flash in them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just see you can see that leech a mile away, and
Yeah.
that, like you said, letting it sink, get to that depth. You know you're in the zone, and just bringing it across the bow to get that turn or that
Mm-hmm.
immediate eat, and the slow follows, whatever it might be, the stalls. What are some
Yeah.
of the tactics that you like to use when you're fishing with those leeches?
Yeah. So because we have so many kokanee, which are the lake run salmon, they get super red and colored up when they're spawning. They'll come into the shallows. So you'll see these big schools of red kokanee, and then if you look really closely, you'll see big big brown trout, big rainbows also kind of swimming within those schools of kokanee. So when I see kokanee, I know that there's going to be trout there because they want to eat their eggs. The kokanee, they're focused on spawning. They're really not going to eat. We don't target them. I'm not worried about um, snagging one. That has never happened to me. You'll get the occasional eat, but again, you're really looking for those big schools of colored up kokanee, and then eventually you'll see trout in there. And I'll just I'll cast tiny tiny leeches within those schools of kokanee. The kokanee will kind of disperse, but sometimes they don't really spook the trout, and just slow strips, like 1 inch ticks. That's kind of the sweet spot, because if you look at it in the water, that leech, they're not jumping 1 inch at a time, because you're always going to have just like a little bit of slack, a little bit of drag in your line. So that really allows for a slow, consistent movement of that leech. And that's when those trout are going to eat it. It's kind of like red fishing, honestly, like fishing for redfish. That's like the best way I can describe it is you can honestly see trout tailing, and you can see their backs moving within the shallow water within these schools of kokanee. And yeah, you can literally just throw your leech right in there, and 9 times out of 10 you'll get something angry enough to want to come eat it. So
yeah, and with brown trout, it's angry enough, right? It's such an aggressive species and fun to catch. You also talked about fishing some of the other styles, etc., or fishing for some of the other species. Let's talk a little bit. Do you ever you don't have to identify the place, but perhaps rainbow trout and maybe dry fly fishing?
Yeah.
One of the things I really enjoy about rainbows is how acrobatic they get, and catching them on dries can be super fun. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think Crane Prairie, that's a great example of I would say a world-class Stillwater rainbow trout fishery. We have so many different hatches. I mentioned the Calabatus. They love damsels as well. Terrestrials, they'll eat just about anything, but those fish, they get so big, they are so aggressive. What I found with the fight with those fish is I'll cast I'll whatever's hatching right at the moment, but I do fish a lot of ants, flying ants out there. Their takes are really subtle for how still the water is. You'll get these subtle eats, and then you'll get one like big initial dive, and it's almost kind of like a brown trout fight at first, or a cutthroat fight at first. You'll get like they'll dog you down, and then you're not really sure like is this a big fish or not, and then it's just game on from there. They go crazy. And I think that's pretty unique, because a lot of times when you're fishing rainbow trout from a river, it's I have a fish on immediately, and they're going nuts. Like with the trout, the rainbow trout around here they're a little bit more patient in the still water. And yeah, I think that's pretty cool. I haven't experienced fights like that fishing for rainbows in moving water before. So
yeah, it's we have some pretty good rainbow fishing around here, and one of the things that I like about when you are fishing Stillwater is how rapidly they'll dive, but then at the same standpoint, it's almost as if they'll come up 2 to 3 times as fast. And you go from that, like letting the line run and trying to control them on that first attack, but then immediately after, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm slacking, I'm stripping that line as fast as I can, trying to keep up with them. And next thing you know, they're on the surface, and you're like, oh, that's a good fish, and then the heart pounding starts, and you're getting after it. So, pretty fun targeting that species. You mentioned brook trout. You mentioned some other species. There's some oddball species up there that you have a, maybe a passion for?
I wouldn't say a passion for, but I mean, there's a lot of unique species, like lake trout, for example. We don't have a lot of lake trout in Oregon, so I would say just in the West in general. So I think lake trout are super cool. I think they're kind of unique. Maybe not in like Montana or Colorado, but for us, they're pretty special. We have excellent bass fishing as well, which not a lot of people know about. Davis Lake is very well known for largemouth bass fishing. It's been pretty low last few years, but with how much water we've been getting this year, I think Davis is gonna be good again for the first time in years. So yeah, and like I said, I know that this, fishing for largemouth, fishing for lake trout, that's not unique to a lot of places. But when you have in Central Oregon, when you have so many other kinds of species, so many kinds of trout, pretty much everything, it's pretty cool that you can really do it all on the lakes out here. So
Yeah. And then on top of it all, you have the rivers, like you
totally.
said.
Yeah, you mentioned Hebgen earlier. It's funny because my experience with those southern Montana lakes. Obviously, I used to guide in that area, so I know that area pretty well. But we would go fish the lakes when the Madison was too crowded, or when the Henry's, when there's too many boats on the Henry's Fork, or too many people at
Yeah.
Harriman Ranch, or Box Canyon. So then it's like, oh, like let's go up to
Right.
Hebgen, but here, you'll actually be like, no, like I'm going to spend my whole day at this lake, and then I'll go here. So it's cool to have an area that actually attracts people to want to come fish lakes up here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hebgen was, for me, we would fish tricos in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we would go camp for a bit. The night would fall, and then you'd mouse.
Yeah,
And then you'd hit the sack, and you'd get up early, and you'd catch PMDs in the morning. And then you'd go fish the
exactly.
river during the
Yeah, totally.
day.
I'm jealous. We
So it
don't
was
we don't get night
pretty
fishing
delightful.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
We've got lots of night fishing in Utah. It's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty good. Alrighty, so let's jump into the Stillwater. And you had mentioned earlier it's like a blank slate, and we've said that on this show, a thousand times, right? It's art. How do you read? How do you read? And I think a lot of people are like, oh yeah, we've heard all these things before, etc. But there, you can always pick up something. And you had a couple things that you mentioned that really helped you in identifying the
Mm-hmm.
water and setting yourself up for success. So walk through those, and then we're going to walk through in detail your nymphing rig.
Yeah. So I'll start off by saying I don't have a fish finder. I don't have any kind of equipment that can tell me what's in the water on my boat. I row a drift boat around, and I putz around with a little two stroke. So what I like to do is I will take the time and I will go explore these lakes when it's low water. I will go in the winter. I won't necessarily go out to fish. But Wickiup, for example, it gets really low in the winter, and I can say, oh, I didn't know this, but this whole beach, there's tons of stumps in it, and you can't tell, at high water. So going and scouting, taking the time in the off season to know what the structure is under the water is really going to set you up for when those lakes fill back up. Another thing is color changes. Color changes are really important. Of course, they're important as well when it comes to fishing rivers, but um, following those beaches, starting along the beaches, and if you're kicking around on a float tube, or rowing a boat, or using a trolling motor, noticing where the beach starts to drop off. There's a little sweet spot there. You have your blue water, your deep, dark blue water. You'll have your lighter, sometimes it's like it looks muddy or sandy. And there's that little area of green. And that's really what you want to be looking for, is those transition zones where the water is going from shallow to deep. Because that is where big fish are cruising along, and they're looking up, and they're trying to see what kind of food is coming over those drop zones, whether that be leeches or chronomids or small bait fish. Yeah, that's really what you're looking for. Um, points, rocky points are great. Even if they're not rocky points, anytime the land is kind of forming a little peninsula, um, big fish are going to hang out there. It's night and day. They are pretty much always going to be there. There's a lot of lakes out here where there's seemingly no structure at all. So observing what the shore is doing, what the bank is doing, and looking for any changes of what of the direction that the bank is moving, whether that be little bumps or really distinct points in the lakes, fish are going to hang out there as well.
Yeah, you had mentioned, I think it was East Lake. You were saying it's a bunch of volcanic rock or something like that along the.
Yeah.
And looking for talus fields, things like that, where there's structure that poured into the lake. And you talked about that color zone, right? So, and that helps you define where the drop off is. And they like the cruise there. Well, and I think another reason they like the cruise there is they have the ability to go deep, quick, hide from predation.
Right.
There's all those characteristics that kind of start to fall into play. And when you start to look at those together, like you said, it really does narrow that body of water down to here are the fishable zones and where I should be targeting.
Yeah. And another thing, if
great,
you don't have, and if you don't have pronounced, like very clear drop zones, look for weeds as well, because it's the same idea. Those bigger fish will kind of cruise around the weeds. They can hide in there. Don't be afraid to cast in weeds. You will, hook a lot of grassy stuff, but eventually, if you kind of strip fast enough, they'll see your fly going from where there's a ton of weeds to where it's kind of open. So that's another transition that I like to look for as well, is where there's a lot of vegetation in the lakes, whether that be tall grass or algae or things like that. So,
yeah, and the plant life holds food, crustaceans, etc., all through there. So big fish, whatever. So that's a great zone too. I like it. Let's dive into this infra you use. First of all, when you're stillwater fishing, you said there's pretty good sized fish in there. What rod are you typically using? You use a 5-6 weight or more? Or?
Yeah, I use a 10-foot 6-weight. Having that extra length on the rod allows for better mends when you're not in moving water. Believe it or not, mending can actually be really important when fishing lakes. But also if you're fishing low, so if you're wading deep, or if you are in a float tube or a pontoon, having that extra foot of rod makes a huge difference for casting. You'll get a lot less back slaps on the water, having that extra length of rod. So 10-foot 6-weight is what I like to use. And I find that the trend is with fishing stillwater is using sinking lines. So like heavy sinking lines, get that down fast. And I think there's definitely a place for sinking lines. Obviously, I fish a lot of sinking lines, but I like to nymph in lakes a lot. I have this indicator rig. I got it from a Northern California guide named Jason Lozano. He is one of the most knowledgeable guides I've ever met. But he has this really deep water rig that he uses on the lower Sac, and he told it to me, and I kind of changed it up and adopted it for fishing stillwater. So what I like to do is I take I would say like 10 feet, like 10 inches to a foot of 20 pounds, something heavy. I'll tie that to a swivel, and then I'll do one whole arm's length of about 10 pound. And that's where that indicator is going to live. To another swivel, to one arm's length of whatever tippet you're using. I typically use 3x or 4x, and that will go to some kind of chronomid or some kind of nymph. So midges are great for lakes, chronomids, and then one whole other arm's length to a balanced leech. So for those who aren't familiar, balanced leeches, the eye of the hook is actually on the hook shank. So it hangs upside down. When you are hanging it under an indicator, it floats perfectly parallel in the water. And I'll cast that out, and again, looking for those transition zones, but giving it a little bit of movement is really important. I move it so slow where you can't see any wake on that indicator. And I've found that just that really slow strip, that allows those flies to cover water where fish are cruising. And yeah, they'll eat it. It's really, really effective. Oh. I think you're muted.
Okay, sorry.
There. Yeah.
If you're imparting some action
Mm-hmm.
on a windy day, are you using the wind and the current to impart the action, or are you continuing to do that yourself?
Exactly. So positioning yourself where you are parallel with the wind, or I guess perpendicular to the wind, where you're casting. So casting that out as best you can, and it is a pain casting. There's no way around it. Casting in the wind sucks, but getting that out there and no mend. Get a big loop in your line, and just let the wind do its thing. So you're not necessarily looking to get like a natural drift per se, but you want those flies to have some movement. So that's fishing wind drifts. Is a lot of fun as well, and extremely frustrating. So.
Yeah, and a tip for when you're fishing wind drifts is you're on your set. When you side set. Yeah, and I know you're familiar with that, right? So you have, like you said, you're letting that belly of line run, and what's happening is the current's pulling, your system. But because of that belly, if you set straight up, you're lifting the line off the water to get to your line tight, and by the time you get your line tight, you're all the way up in the air. But if you side set, you're actually using the tension on that water to draw the line and pull the rig and get that nice tight set on that.
Exactly. It's the difference between setting on your fly line and setting on the fish. So like you said, when you're straight up, all you're doing is you're just setting to your indicator. So
yeah. I like that technique. The double swivels probably keeps a lot of the twisting out of your line, which sometimes you get with having that balanced lease or multiple fly set up. And I also like the idea of having that kind of heavier line up high, which helps you with controlling your indicator depth and not slipping and sliding, etc.
Totally. And I always use fluorocarbon, no matter what. I'm a superstitious man. I when I'm fishing Stillwater, I am always using fluoro tippet, no matter what. Even on the heavy stuff, I'll use 20-pound fluoro. So that's just me. It's expensive, but I also catch fish out there. So
right, and you don't have to change very often. It's
the that's
abrasion
nice
resistance, the right, the level of line that you're using, the strength and thickness. If you're on 3x, 4x, you can run that rig for a long time before you're going to have trouble.
Totally. Yeah, and the idea is this is a deep rig, right? You want to get down as deep as you can, but fish are hanging out in all these different levels in lakes. There's fish cruising in like the middle section. There's fish that'll, you'll see swimming up top. It's in a seemingly very deep area. So also, moving that indicator up and down on that section in between swivels is really important, because even if you're going to fish it really deep, don't be afraid to play around with shortening it up a little bit. And you'll be surprised what a difference that can make.
Yeah, fish to the fish you can see, right?
Yeah.
If you're seeing them cruising up high, yeah, adjust your rig, see what
Totally.
happens. And then you can always go deeper. So, hey, Dalton, it was good having you on the show, man. I learned a lot about the Stillwater in that area. I didn't know it was so prolific. It's great to see. I'm excited to explore up there this year. I got some trips planned up that way, so I'm going to have to look you up and
Yeah, definitely
check out some of that Stillwater for sure.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on.
Thanks again for being on the show. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can contact Confluence Fly Shop. Ask for me. You can email me at Romo Fly Fishing, ROMO Fly Fishing @gmail. That's my work email, and I'm also on Instagram at Romo Fly Fishing. So any of those ways, I will get back to you.
All right, man. Well, again, great having you on the show. Quite the description on the Stillwater. We got a lot of beta out of you. I'm sure there's going to be some people maybe rubbing shoulders with you in the parking lot for some information while they're up there. So looking forward to hearing some stories. And that's it for us this week, guys. See you next week.